Revenge with Karen.
I knew I should have walked out the second Greg ordered a second whiskey before the appetizers even hit the table. But no, like the good little HR puppet I was apparently supposed to be, I stayed seated, napkin in lap, smile stitched on like I hadn't already mapped out 6 different ways to jam his overpriced watch up his colon. We were 3 bites into a Caesar salad when he leaned back, laughing that smug, loose jaw laugh of his, one that always came right before he said something that made everyone else at the table stare at their bread rolls like they were auditioning for a carb-only diet. Still just in HR, he snickered, flicking a glance at me like I was the office plant that somehow started talking. Must be cozy, watching the grown-ups handle the real numbers. I blinked, once, smiled, twice, because if I didn't, I would have flung my fork straight into his botoxed forehead and shouted surprise. HR can file homicide reports too. Instead, I chewed on a crouton so hard my molar cracked. That's the trick, isn't it? HR learns how to swallow things that would make a lesser man choke. Like being called just HR after 12 years of cleaning up executive temper tantrums, wiping the blood off botched mergers, keeping Greg's company out of 7 wrongful termination lawsuits he never even knew about. But here's the real kicker. I'd already quit. Greg didn't know it, but I'd handed in my resignation 5 days earlier, sealed under NDA to be announced at the end of the quarter. Because while he was busy flexing his MBA over lunch, I was already deep in talks with Monarch Industries. You know, that tech giant his own CEO had been begging to partner with. Yeah, that Monarch, they called me. Not a recruiter, not a headhunter, the board chair. Said they needed someone who knew more than numbers, someone who understood people, power, and how to make men like Greg piss themselves with a smile on their face. So while Greg went on about his CrossFit totals and how his son's startup just got angel funded by a guy from Shark Tank, I sipped my water and imagined the look on his face when he found out I'd be leading Monarch's side of the $200 million joint venture his team was already botching. But let me pause for 1 second and say this, because if you're still listening and you've ever been called just anything, just HR, just admin, just an assistant, you're exactly the kind of person who gets the last laugh in stories like this. If you want more stories where the underdog doesn't just bite back, but chews through the chain, go ahead and tap that subscribe button and throw us a like. It helps the team bring you more corporate carnage with a twist of cold justice. All right, back to Greg. So we finish lunch, and he claps me on the shoulder like we're old college bros, says something about catching up next quarter, walks out like he didn't just give me every ounce of fuel I needed to light his professional reputation on fire. Back at the office, they were planning a farewell coffee break for me. Paper banner, store-bought sheet cake, a card they'd forgotten to pass around. HR to the end, right? But I wasn't mad. I was detached, like a surgeon before the first incision. Because while they were arguing over whether to go with vanilla or chocolate frosting, I was reviewing Monarch's internal audit on Titan's compliance performance. And let me tell you, it read like a slow-motion car crash narrated by a drunk intern. I saw the gaps, the overlooked clauses, the missed renewal notices. Stuff I'd helped write during the original partnership negotiations that Greg's people had apparently filed under irrelevant because, again, just HR. And in that moment, realized something. The only thing worse than being underestimated is being underestimated by someone who should know better. Because when you forget that the quiet woman taking notes in the corner once wrote the damn playbook, you don't just look stupid. You sign the wrong line, miss the fine print, and hand her the keys to your kingdom. That binder Greg waved off during our last compliance sync, I built half the templates in it. That staffer he thought just handled onboarding. Yeah, she was quoting my SOPs verbatim. And the clause they'd skipped in the JV agreement, I wrote it. I buried it, and now I was going to use it. Funny thing about being just HR, turns out we know where all the bodies are buried because we're the ones who bought the shovels. It started with a blocked number. Normally, I don't pick up. But something in me, it wasn't intuition, it was something colder, said answer this. Maybe it was the same reflex that kept me scanning every exit sign in a room, or knowing exactly how long Greg could talk before incriminating himself. Miss Ramirez, the voice said, low, composed. Female, corporate but not sterile. This is Linda. This is Camille Adkins. I'm calling on behalf of Monarch Industries. We'd like to speak to you regarding an urgent executive opportunity. Would you have time this afternoon? At first, I thought it was a mistake. Monarch, company that made our entire IT department sweat bullets every time they were mentioned in procurement meetings. The company that Greg's CEO kept name-dropping like a bad Tinder date who ghosted him. Is this about a referral? I asked, still mentally scanning my LinkedIn for any weak connection that could have landed this call. No, this is about you. They patched me into a video call an hour later. I expected a recruiter, maybe an assistant with a script. Instead, got a 5-person panel. One woman from legal, one from strategy, and front and center, the chairman of the board. All dressed like they'd been planning this for weeks, not hours. Their CFO had been forced out, mid-deal. NDA breach tied to a conflict of interest, apparently. He'd been feeding competitor intel to an investment firm his wife had ties to. Cute. They needed someone who could step in immediately, not just a placeholder. Someone who knew the mess, could navigate a high-pressure, highly political transition, and renegotiate a joint venture that was already bleeding capital. The deal? A $200 million shared project between Monarch and Titan Solutions. That name hit like a slap. You're dealing with Titan? I asked, keeping my tone level, but my mind already a blender of names and emails and yes, Greg. Yes, said the strategy exec. Unfortunately, their team is disorganized. Believe the issues stem from a lack of internal alignment on their end. That's code. Executive dysfunction. Translation. Greg's ego's writing checks his team can't cash. I paused, took a slow sip of the lukewarm office coffee I hadn't even meant to drink. They offered the interim CFO position. 6 months. Full executive control over the JV project, including renegotiation rights, compliance oversight, and budget authority. The kind of role they usually offer to finance lifers with pedigrees and padded resumes full of mergers and golf weekends. I wasn't that. But I was the woman who'd onboarded a third of Titan's leadership over the years. The one who'd written half the partnership language Monarch was now trying to enforce. The one who knew Greg's negotiation style, his fallback positions, his exact threshold for bluffing. And more importantly, was the one who'd been invisible until I chose otherwise. I'll need to tender a resignation, I said. They nodded, we understand. Quietly, of course, NDA, no LinkedIn update, no email announcement. They'd send a courier with the contract and have it waiting for signature in my driveway by morning. It was midnight by the time I finally shut my laptop and stared out my kitchen window. The kind of October night where the cold makes the glass sweat. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked like it just discovered existential dread. I hadn't even told my husband yet. He still thought I'd be making banana bread for my farewell coffee break next week. Poor guy thought I cared about frosting flavors. But me, I was already mentally repacking my office drawer. Notebooks, a flash drive with templates I'd created, and that stupid mug Greg got me 3 Christmases ago. HR, because even CEOs need moms, kept it as a joke. Now it felt like evidence in a slow-burning arson case. The next morning, I walked into the office like it was any other Tuesday. No fanfare. Just me, a navy blazer, and a resignation letter already delivered via private courier before sunrise. Only the COO knew. He gave me a look in the hallway like he wanted to ask questions, but also didn't want to risk knowing the answers. Smart man. By lunch, the sheet cake had been ordered. Vanilla, no one asked me. Fitting, I smiled through it, signed a card for myself, took a polite bite, and then excused myself early, citing an off-site onboarding commitment. Technically true, just not for the company they thought. Because in 48 hours, I'd be sitting across from Titan Solutions' executive team, wearing a new badge, holding a new title, carrying a binder full of red lines that would make Greg wish he'd taken up goat herding instead of business development. I wasn't just changing jobs. I was changing leverage. The sheet cake said, "Good luck, Linda," in blue icing that looked like it had been piped by someone with early onset rage and a dull butter knife. The room smelled like reheated Costco quiche and desperation. HR had done their best, balloons that drooped like forgotten hopes, one sad banner dangling over the microwave like a threat. Everyone stood around pretending not to check the clock. I'd planned to skip the whole thing, but skipping gives people the impression that you're still upset. And I wasn't, not anymore. I was past upset. I was in that cold, crystalline place where you don't even flinch when the guillotine drops, because you're the one who sharpened the blade. I stood near the Keurig, sipping decaf like it was fine wine, nodding at the platitudes. You'll be missed. What are you doing next? Taking time for yourself? I smiled and lied like a pro. Oh, just a little break, might consult. Who knows? Who knows, indeed. The truth was, I'd already given Monarch's board my preliminary compliance assessment the night before. The kind of report that makes general counsel put down their shrimp cocktail and start praying. They were shocked. Titan's documentation was a mess. Expired vendor agreements. Performance reports with gaps wide enough to drive a lawsuit through. Audit logs missing entire months. But I wasn't shocked. I'd seen the rot firsthand. I'd filed polite follow-ups about it, flagged issues for Titan's strategic operations team. You know, Greg's domain. The same Greg who once replied to a risk alert with a thumbs-up emoji. So I stood in that stale little break room, watching middle managers pretend this was a meaningful send-off, when in reality, it was just another calendar event between Q3 reconciliation and Wellness Wednesday, free chair yoga. That's when he walked in, Greg, 20 minutes late, like always, wearing his jacket slung over one shoulder like he was starring in an HR-themed rom-com no one asked for. Loud laugh already primed, eyes scanning for an audience. Hey, Linda. He called out like we were old pals. Didn't miss the cake, did I? You could almost hear the collective internal cringe. He grabbed a slice, ignored the fork, and took a bite big enough to dislocate his jaw. So what's next? Early retirement? Or just moving to that mystical land where careers go to nap, HR's final resting place? Some people laughed, not because it was funny, because they didn't want to be the one left not laughing. That's Greg's magic trick. He turns awkward into obligation. Didn't laugh? I didn't even blink. I just looked at him, really looked. Like you look at a problem you're about to solve with extreme prejudice. He had frosting on his chin and zero idea that, in less than 48 hours, I'd be reviewing a joint budget line item that included his division's entire operating cost, and whether it survived Q4 was now my decision. But I didn't say a word. I let the silence sit, thick, heavy, unblinking. He finally shifted, mumbled something about a call he had to take, and walked out with his phone pressed to his ear like it owed him money. A few coworkers murmured apologies on his behalf. I waved them off. It's fine, I said, and it was, because I didn't need his apology. I needed his overconfidence, his habit of not reading past page 2, his belief that I'd always stay seated while he held the mic. I stayed another 10 minutes, enough time to collect the mug I didn't want and sign the farewell card someone passed around too late. It had 3 signatures. One said best wishes. One said don't be a stranger. The third just said cake was good. I walked back to my office, closed the door, and exhaled slowly. That was it. The last page of the old chapter, closed without fanfare. No drama, no raised voices. Just the quiet tick of a woman slipping out of her old skin and into something sharper. I left the building that evening. The security guard called out, "See you Monday." I smiled without turning around. "No," I said, "you won't." The lobby of Monarch Industries didn't feel like a tech company. It felt like a surgical theater. All glass and silence and immaculate lighting, like even the photons had to pass background checks. A far cry from the crumbling beige carpet and passive-aggressive whiteboards I just left behind. No budget memos taped to the fridge, no microwave with a do not heat fish sign, just cold efficiency and polished power. I'd been issued my badge before I arrived, pre-activated with full access credentials. No onboarding video, no stack of laminated HR pamphlets, just a silent courier at 6 a.m. with a leather folder, a code for the underground garage, and a schedule that read like a war plan. At precisely 8:02 a.m., I stepped into my new office on the 34th floor. No nameplate yet, just CFO interim. Fine, I preferred clean slates. By 8:07, I was on a call with Monarch Legal. By 8:13, they'd walked me through the bleeding wound that was the Titan joint venture. I knew before they even finished the first sentence. This was a Greg problem. Titan's side had missed 3 key compliance benchmarks, each tied to financial incentives. That meant automatic penalties, not theoretical ones. We'll talk about it in Q4 hand waves. These were real, dollar-eating clauses, ones I had helped draft during my old company's negotiation phase, back when I'd been just HR, but somehow still the only one in the room who gave a damn about enforceable language. Clause 7.3b, Vendor Performance Thresholds. Clause 11.2, Quarterly Compliance Audits. Appendix D, Dispute Escalation Triggers. They'd missed all of them. Sloppy documentation. Late reports. A risk dashboard last updated 2 quarters ago. It wasn't just bad execution, it was evidence. Tangible, time-stamped negligence. I sat back in my chair and let the silence settle around me like armor. The Monarch finance lead, a numbers-first guy named Drew, was still walking me through the details when I stopped him mid-sentence. "Pause for a second," I said. He blinked. Sure." I flipped open the binder they'd prepped. It was my language, my claws, my fingerprints, still smudged on the blueprint of this mess. "I wrote this," I said, tapping the section on performance escalation rights. "You what? This clause, it's mine. I helped build the original draft language when I was supporting the negotiation from my previous company. I know the structure better than Titan does." A silence stretched, the kind you don't interrupt. Drew finally muttered, "Well, damn." Task ahead was clear. Renegotiate the contract to stop the financial hemorrhaging, establish new reporting guardrails, and ensure the joint venture didn't implode under Titan's incompetence. And I had all the leverage I needed, written in my own hand, buried in language Greg's team clearly never bothered to read past. By 10 a.m., I'd flagged 12 potential breaches. By noon, I had a draft memo to Monarch's executive board summarizing the risk exposure. By 2 p.m., I was leading a closed-door session with legal and strategy to outline a renegotiation timeline. At 3:27 p.m., Monarch's CEO, Arvind Patel, knocked on my door. He didn't do formal introductions, just stepped inside, glanced at the red lines across my desk, and said, "They told me you came in like a scalpel." I shrugged. Greg handed me the patient with a heartbeat and no pulse. "I'm just here to resuscitate or pronounce." He smiled without smiling. "Do what you need to do." Then he left. That was it. No ceremony, no welcome gift, just full executive authority and a mandate to clean up a $200 million mistake. I stayed until almost 9 that night, not because I had to, because I wanted to. There's something intoxicating about being underestimated and then handed the wheel anyway. Like being mistaken for the valet and driving off with the whole dealership. Greg didn't know I was here. Not yet. But soon, he'd be in a room he thought he controlled, opening a binder he thought was his advantage, only to find my fingerprints on every page. The fire had already started. He just hadn't smelled the smoke. The breach alert came in just before dawn, buried in a flagged email thread from Monarch Legal marked urgent JV exposure. I was already at my desk. Some combination of jet fuel coffee and spite had me reviewing vendor performance logs while half the building was still asleep. The email was short, but the implications were biblical. Titan's delays in submitting their Q3 environmental compliance report, specifically the water treatment data from their northern site, violated the JV's regulatory disclosure obligations. Monarch's exposure, $20 million per month. It wasn't just noncompliance, was torch the joint down liability. I stared at the screen, not blinking, as legal attached snapshots of the contract, my contract, Clause 9.1, breach penalties and mitigated revisions. The clause allowed Monarch to initiate renegotiation of terms if the breach created financial exposure exceeding $10M for 2 consecutive quarters. We were now at 6 weeks of bleeding and counting. The legal team set a meeting for 10 a.m., but I didn't wait. I pulled the original red lines I'd drafted 3 years ago and reread them like scripture. I remembered the fight it took to get that clause into the deal, how Titan's old COO tried to kill it off in favor of collaborative correction, and how I argued that collaboration without teeth was just a group hug in a burning building. Now, those teeth were razor sharp and aimed directly at Greg's jugular. By 10:23, we were in the war room, actual glass conference vault Monarch reserved for high-stakes calls. Legal, strategy, risk, compliance, all staring at me. I laid it out. We invoke 9.1, we renegotiate, but we don't go in swinging blind. The room waited. We need someone they recognize. Someone they underestimate, someone they won't see coming until the contract's already rewritten. Camille from strategy tilted her head. "You volunteering?" "I'm offering," I said, flipping over a 1-page meeting brief I'd already prepared. With one caveat, we let Titan think they asked for it. Cue the next beat in the trap. That afternoon, Monarch's legal team sent a polite but firm memo to Titan Solutions. Due to recent financial exposure stemming from operational delays, we'd be exercising the joint venture renegotiation clause, as outlined in 9.1. We're welcome to propose a meeting time within the next 5 business days. By 7:41 p.m., Titan's CEO replied. He was rattled. You could see it in the phrasing, escalating matter, potential realignment, open to immediate discussion. He requested a face-to-face. They wanted to keep things friendly, internal, Executive to executive. That's when Greg chimed in. Oh, Greg replied to his CEO's thread, suggesting they assign someone senior from Monarch's side to handle the discussion. Preferably someone with historical familiarity, he wrote, but not someone too junior to have real authority. I laughed out loud, because there it was, the final confirmation that Greg still thought of me as support staff with a nice email signature. A glorified hall monitor. He didn't even realize I was in the thread. Monarch's CEO forwarded me the exchange with a single line, "Your call." I drafted the meeting agenda that night, 4 pages, tightly structured, starting with historical compliance benchmarks and ending with proposed realignments and penalty adjustments. I didn't pull punches, but I didn't lead with a baseball bat either. Let the numbers speak. Let the silence after each bullet point to the damage. At the bottom of the agenda, sign my name and title. Linda Ramirez, Chief Financial Officer, Monarch Industries. No bold, no italics, no fluff. Just a title that would hit like a cold slap when Greg opened the document. Camille walked by my office around 9:30, saw me still at my desk. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" I didn't even pretend to deny it. "There's a kind of satisfaction," I said, "in letting someone build their own execution chamber out of paperwork and arrogance." She smirked. "Just make sure you leave the door open long enough for him to realize it." "Oh," I said, "he'll realize it. Just not before he sits down at the table, because this wasn't just a negotiation. This was a reckoning in a blazer. The night before the meeting, I didn't sleep. Not because of nerves, because of clarity. That sharp, electric calm you get before the storm hits and you realize you're the one steering it." I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by a war zone of paper and espresso. 4 binders open, 2 laptops glowing, and 1 cat sitting directly on the most important spreadsheet, like he'd been personally dispatched by Greg to sabotage me. Didn't matter. I'd already memorized the key breach points. Greg could have sent in the ghost of PowerPoints past, and I still would have had my foot on his company's neck before lunch. The binder I was building wasn't thick, just lean and lethal. A surgical dossier of every point Titan had fumbled, signed, or failed to notice. I color-coded the red lines, compliance breaches in crimson, audit gaps in slate gray, and Greg's personal oversights in gold. Petty, maybe, satisfying, like a bourbon chaser after 12 years of being called support. At 10:11 p.m., I got the message. Subject, quick favor, from Greg Langston to Linda Ramirez at my old company. Com. CC, Titan Solutions CEO, Titan Legal, 2 random VPs, and apparently his dog walker judging by the address list. Body, "Hey Linda, saw that Monarch's requesting some renegotiation stuff. Fun, right? Was wondering if you're still in HR over there or involved in any way. Maybe you could pull a few strings and keep it from becoming a big production. Let's keep it chill, no need for courtroom vibe." Greg, I read it twice. Still in HR. Pull a few strings. No need for a courtroom vibe. The man was about to walk into a contract tribunal with his fly unzipped and a joke in his back pocket. I considered ignoring it, but that would have been merciful. Instead, I clicked reply all. From Linda Ramirez at Monarch.com to Greg Langston CC, everyone and their mother subject, quick favor, body, you'll see me tomorrow. Linda Ramirez, Chief Financial Officer, Monarch Industries. I stared at the screen a second longer, then hit send. 1 line, 1 title, a bullet made of pixels and past grievances. At 11:02 p.m., Arvind Patel, Monarch CEO, texted me directly. "Want me in the room? I'll clear my morning." I thought about it. Thought about what it would look like to have a billion-dollar CEO flanking me like a corporate bodyguard. The intimidation factor. The optics. I typed back, "No, this needs to be personal." He replied with a single thumbs-up emoji and a gif of a guillotine. Professionalism, Monarch style. By midnight, the binder was done. Not just a document, a blueprint of consequence. A quiet indictment in 3 parts. 1, here's what you promised. 2, here's what you failed to deliver. And 3, here's what it's going to cost you now. I slid the binder into a matte black folio with silver corners. No Monarch logos, no fluff, just weight. The kind of thing that lands on a boardroom table and changes oxygen levels. I didn't dream that night. I didn't need to. The real dream was already locked and loaded in a 4-pound binder, and a nameplate that said CFO. Not temporary, not interim, not acting. Just Linda Ramirez, Chief Financial Officer. Greg still thought he was walking into a friendly renegotiation. Still thought I'd be somewhere in the background, taking notes or passing water bottles. Still thought HR meant soft edges and helpful smiles. And that, more than anything else, meant he'd already lost. Morning couldn't come fast enough. Titan's conference room looked like it had been panic cleaned. Chairs scrubbed within an inch of their lives, cables neatly coiled like someone thought optics could save them now. Bottled waters lined up like they were ready to testify. But nothing could mask the tension, clung to the air like a fire alarm that wouldn't shut up. Their CFO sat with a nervous twitch in his jaw, flipping through an untouched notepad. Legal counsel looked like she'd just downed 3 Xanax and prayed for mercy. And Greg was holding court like it was open mic night at a hedge fund happy hour. His voice carried too loud, too confident. I heard it before I even hit the hallway. They'll probably send someone junior, maybe from compliance. Don't need to panic, okay? This isn't some kind of courtroom crossfire. It's a renegotiation. A conversation, friendly table. The elevator dinged. My heels hit the polished floor like a gavel. Click, click, click. I didn't pause. I didn't knock. I just opened the glass door and stepped into the room like I was returning to a crime scene with a flashlight and immunity. Every head turned. Greg froze mid-sentence, smile on his face calcifying into something between confusion and creeping horror. His eyes scanned me like he was solving a riddle in real time, how Linda from HR had managed to wander into a meeting for grown-ups. Linda? Titan's CEO stood, half rising from his chair, uncertain. I set the binder on the table. Let it land with a flat thud that sliced through the silence like a verdict. Yes, I said, I'm leading this. The CEO blinked. From Monarch. From Monarch, I confirmed. Calm, surgical. Greg's mouth opened, but no words came out, just a small wheeze of disbelief. Finally, he managed to stammer, You're with them? I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. I let the silence hang for half a beat, then replied without turning my head. I am them. The room shifted. You could feel the power rebalance itself like tectonic plates. The air got thinner. Titan's GC straightened in her seat. CFO suddenly found something fascinating in the label on his water bottle. And Greg looked like someone had swapped his protein shake with arsenic. I opened the binder with one hand, flipping to the first page of flagged clauses. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The weight of every word did the heavy lifting. Page 1, I said, sliding copies across the table. Begin with performance benchmarks missed in Q3 and the financial exposure generated by Titan's delay in environmental reporting. That exposure, as outlined in Clause 9.1, entitles Monarch to invoke full renegotiation authority under the joint venture agreement. Greg tried to jump in. Hold on, we didn't. I raised a hand. Not high, not aggressive, just enough to remind him what control looked like. You'll have time to respond, Greg, I said, finally looking him in the eye. After the data is presented. We're here for clarity, not denial. He sank back in his chair, red blotches blooming up his neck like he was being strangled by his own collar. Titan's CEO cleared his throat. Can we take a minute before we proceed? I nodded once. You may. But the clock started 2 quarters ago. I watched them glance at one another, each man waiting for someone else to take the hit. The weight was already evenly distributed. The terms were in motion. The binder was open, and I was no longer the woman in the corner taking notes. I was the one rewriting the script. Every missed benchmark, every late report, every cocky remark Greg had ever tossed my way, now weaponized into leverage, clause by clause, decimal by decimal. He didn't see it coming, because men like Greg never do. They think power is loud. But real power, ill power walks in, sets down a binder, and watches you unravel in your own boardroom. Greg was still reeling when I turned to page 5. The rustle of paper in the room sounded like panic trying to disguise itself as professionalism. His jaw was tight, fists clenched beneath the table like he thought he could hold the contract together with muscle alone. This, I said, tapping the redlined section with the Monarch letterhead crisp and unyielding, is the revised agreement. We've implemented new guardrails to prevent further slippage, beginning with bi-weekly performance check-ins, mandatory third-party audits, and formal breach reporting triggers. Titan's legal counsel shifted in her chair, not objecting, not surprised, just preparing to translate the inevitable to her internal crisis team. Section 4, I continued, introduces an automatic noncompliance penalty of $10 million per quarter, dated to the start of the reporting gap. Should future delays occur, Monarch reserves the right to terminate the JV unilaterally without financial liability. I paused to let the words sink in. Not the numbers, the implications. $10 million retroactive. That was blood money for Titan, especially with their Q4 forecasts hanging by a thread. Greg finally broke. You can't be serious, he snapped, his voice cracking like a windshield under pressure. Backdated penalties, bi-weekly audits. We're not a prison camp, Linda. I looked at him, not unkindly. Just the way a surgeon might look at a tumor before removal. You're right, Greg, you're not a prison camp, you're a liability, and Monarch doesn't bet on liabilities without insurance. He turned to his CFO, seeking backup, an ally, a lifeline, anything. But Titan's CFO didn't move, didn't blink. He just kept staring at the line item I'd highlighted in gold. Cumulative penalty math lived like a quiet executioner. The silence from his corner was louder than any scream. Titan's CEO tried to reassert control, straightening in his chair. We'll need to take this back for legal review. He stopped mid-sentence. The screen on the wall lit up. Monarch's CEO, Arvind, appeared via secure video feed, framed in muted tones and backlit like he'd just stepped off the bridge of a warship. Morning, he said evenly. Hope I'm not late. Titan's execs collectively stiffened. Greg blinked twice, then instinctively closed the binder like a kid caught reading someone else's diary. Not at all, I replied. We're just finishing the overview. Arvind smiled, not warm, not cruel, just sharp. I read the revisions. Clean work, Linda, surgical. Congratulations on your first successful kill. Greg flinched. Titan's CEO cleared his throat. We weren't expecting. Should have been expecting this, Arvind cut in. You've had 6 weeks of mounting risk and 2 formal notices ignored. Linda didn't ambush you. She followed your map straight to this table. Then he turned to me. You want my recommendation? Yes. Don't backdate the penalty, triple it. The room went dead silent. I didn't smile. That's not what this moment was for. This wasn't vengeance. This wasn't a climax ripped from some cheap office drama. This was consequence. Cold, glamorous consequence, signed in ink and ratified by signatures and silence. No need, I said softly. The original terms hold. The damage is done. Let's just make sure it doesn't get worse. Arvind nodded once. Your call, I'll leave you to it. And just like that, the screen faded. Titan's CEO leaned back like someone had knocked the air out of him. He didn't even look at Greg. Greg, he looked like he wanted to stand, protest, scream, do something. All he could manage was another glance at his silent CFO, who gave him absolutely nothing. The power in the room had shifted. No, not shifted, detonated, and the fallout had settled exactly where it needed to. I closed the binder gently and slid it across the table. You'll have 24 hours to review and sign, I said. If not, we invoke full withdrawal procedures. No raised voice, no fist pounding, just terms. And mine were final. Titan's CEO signed with the same look you see on passengers when the oxygen masks drop. Not panic, just grim surrender. His pen scraped across the signature line like it was writing his own confession. The room was silent except for the soft click of the binder clasping shut, a sound that landed heavier than any slam. He didn't look up, didn't speak, just pushed the folder toward me like he couldn't get it out of his hands fast enough. Greg, he said, not raising his voice, not even meeting his eyes. Stay behind, that was it. The rest of the team filed out in silence. The GC left with a jaw so tight it looked wired shut. The CFO followed, shoulders hunched like he was hoping no one would ask him how long he'd seen it coming. Even Titan's VP of Ops gave Greg a look that said, "This is your grave, not ours." I waited until the glass doors closed and the last shuffle of expensive shoes faded into the hallway. Then I turned to Greg. He hadn't moved, just sat there with his hands tented in front of him like a man praying at the altar of his own downfall. The confidence was gone. The smirk, the lazy, patronizing charm that used to float on every sentence like an aftertaste of power. All gone. What remained was something raw. Not regret. Not even shame. Just the stunned quiet of a man who finally realized the gun was loaded, and he'd been chewing on the barrel for months. I leaned forward, resting my hands lightly on the table between us. You know, Greg, I said, voice even, calm, I was never just HR. He flinched just slightly, like the word had turned into a slur. I was your compliance watchdog, I continued, the one who flagged the data you didn't read. I was your exit clause, written in plain English you never bothered to understand. I was your succession plan, buried in folders you had your assistant delete because they didn't come with pie charts. And now, I slid a small matte card across the table. It stopped just short of his hand. I'm your audit trail. He didn't touch it, didn't blink. Just stared at the card like it might detonate if flipped over. Linda Ramirez, Chief Financial Officer, Monarch Industries. No tagline, no slogan. As truth, you'll want to update your contact list, I said as I stood, or your liar. He opened his mouth, closed it. There it was again, that stunned fishbowl silence that men like Greg never prepare for, because they're trained to expect applause or resistance, not indifference. And what I gave him was colder than fury, it was closure. I walked to the door without looking back. Each step echoed across the tile, sharp and deliberate, not rushed, not performative. Just heels, clicking like a gavel. Click, click. And then the door opened, and I stepped out, leaving Greg alone at the table with nothing but numbers, silence, and the hollow shape of his own undoing. He had underestimated the quiet woman in the corner, and now she was the signature that changed his future. You're the real stars of the corporate jungle. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe, or I'll flick the switch on your old cubicle memories.